Well, I was planning on doing this video series around January, uh, I think. So I'm a little behind. My computer is really slow, so I had to um, decrease the rate of uploads that I did because it takes several hours to upload a 15-minute video. The scientific status of the God hypothesis. So let me tweak everything here a little bit. In his book, which is as infamous as it is ridiculous, Richard Dawkins speaks repeatedly of the God hypothesis. His buddy Victor Stenger wrote a book called God, the Failed Hypothesis. Speaking of the proposition expressing the existence of God as a scientific hypothesis opens it up to examination by the standard methods of science. But is it a failed hypothesis, as Dr. Stenger has said? I do not think so. While I am not myself a scientist, and the examination to follow may seem a bit quirky, perhaps not standard, I will try to do my best to follow the methods such as a scientist may follow in the lab, or rather after the lab, when examining the data and trying to draw conclusions. I will honestly try to not let my preconceived theology get in the way and to be as objective as possible. I will even be more generous to the opposing side, atheism, than I am wont to do, and more skeptical of my own position that then comes natural to me. So I'm trying to eliminate my biases as much as I possibly can, try to be as objective as possible, which is what ideally scientists do as well in the field. Now, the general procedure will be to look at the world and compare what we actually see around us with what we would expect to see if God does exist on the one hand, and do the same on the assumption of God's lack of existence. The world is the way that it is, in other words, so which hypothesis, for God or against, is the better confirmed by what we actually see in the world around us? It is commonly asserted that believing in God makes no predictions, that it's a science stopper. I reject that idea right from the outset. At least I do not assume it a priori, and shall let the data of the natural world speak for itself. Let's follow the evidence where it leads. The scientific methodology I shall employ also has the advantage of comprehensiveness. That is, everything we could possibly say in favor of both atheism and religion shall be considered. When we are done, we'll have the best case for the non-existence of God, and at the same time, we'll have the best case for God's reality. Which side shall win? Stay tuned. But I am overgeneralizing a bit here, for we are only considering empirical observations. That's what science is based on. It's not pure thought, but observing the world. As Stenger said in a recent debate with William Lane Craig, the world is the way it is, whether we like it or not. We have to follow the evidence where it leads. The ontological argument, for example, that is traditionally conceived as purely rational as opposed to being empirical. So I'm not going to consider that particular argument. If I leave any evidence out, then on either side of the God question, it is because the evidence is non-empirical in nature. Or I may leave certain lines of evidence out because they are contained by implication in other areas I consider. For example, I will cover evolution as evidence against the existence of God, and so I will not consider bad biological design, or dysteleology as it's sometimes called, as a separate datum. So this will eliminate double dipping, if you will. It is included, the dysteleology is included in the datum of evolution. There is a third possibility why I may leave something out of my considerations. Namely, I may not have thought of it. Like every empirical investigation, this one is open to further emendation if more data comes in. Science is always changing, always adding more information into the mix. If you notice that I have left something out as we go along, please let me know. I have tried to cover everything, but I may have overlooked some things. I suspect that I probably have overlooked very many things, but I try to not overlook anything. So then, what I shall do is list all of the predictions for the two hypotheses. One hypothesis is God exists, the other is that God does not exist. We're comparing these to see which is the stronger confirmed hypothesis. And we're going to assign a number to each one. So look at all the predictions for both hypotheses and assign a number to each of these predictions. A 0 next to a datum means that that item is not confirmatory of the given hypothesis. So if there is something that doesn't increase our confidence in a hypothesis, it gets a 0. If there's something that well, a 1 next to a datum, next to an item, means that if the given hypothesis is true, then we expect the prediction or datum to be fulfilled. So if evolution makes atheism more likely, then it gets a 1, for example. Finally, a 2 next to a datum means that the given datum is not possible given the a priori rejection of the given hypothesis. So if for example, of miracles, the occurrence of miracles are impossible on atheism, then for the God hypothesis, miracles would get a 2, because if we deny the God hypothesis, if we affirm atheism, then we have to, it would seem, deny the possibility of miracles, so we get a 2. So it doesn't make it more likely, but it is not possible if the hypothesis is false, if the other hypothesis is true. Now that was quite a mouthful, so let me see if I can maybe make it a little bit clearer, and I'll put this in the description as well, just so it's clear. A 1 means that our confidence in the hypothesis is increased. The probability is raised by a 1, but a 2 is possible only if the hypothesis is true, and otherwise it's not possible at all. Okay, that was a bit tedious, but I hope that you stay with me here. So we'll make 2 columns on a sheet of paper. Say, right, God does not exist on the left hand, and God does exist on the right hand column of the paper. And in each column under these, we will list all the confirmatory data or predictions of those hypotheses, and add up the numbers. Whichever column has the highest score, so to speak, shall be the one a reasonable person ought to accept. I think that this is a good way of going about it, but again, I'm not a scientist, but hopefully that will be acceptable to you if you know more about science than I do. Alright, so we'll make 2 columns, add them up, see which one wins. Before getting to the columns, there are two more preliminary remarks that I need to make. And they're both related to a principle which is very important when shopping for scientific hypotheses. And I'm speaking, of course, of Occam's razor, the principle of parsimony. Now, the first remark about Occam's razor is that we need to have clear in our minds exactly what Occam's razor is. It is commonly said that the Occam's razor means that we should accept the simpler theory or hypothesis. I will refute that idea. Occam's razor is rather the principle that we are not to multiply entities beyond what is necessary. The simplest theory of all would be monistic pantheism, but we should not automatically accept it on the basis of Occam's razor. That is a fundamental misunderstanding of Occam's razor. So if we need to multiply entities to fully explain something, a datum, why that is perfectly legitimate. Occam himself would presumably counsel us to multiply as many entities as we need, and just as many as we need. Not too little and not too much. Just right, like Goldilocks. Now, the second remark about Occam's razor that I need to point out is that the God hypothesis is not contrary. The God hypothesis is not complex. God is not complex. We cannot discount it from the get-go on the basis of Occam's razor. Now, this is something which, in the God delusion, Richard Dawkins apparently misunderstood. But God is simple, not complex. Now, I used to think that Dawkins was saying that if God has a mind, then he must have a material brain, which is complex in the sense that it is made up of multiple material parts. But it seems since then that what Dawkins, may have had in mind in saying that a designer has to be more complex than what the designer, has designed, it seems like what he was getting at is something like the following. The thoughts of God, the blueprint in his head, if you will, that he used in the designing process is at least as complex as the actual designs themselves. So the thoughts of the design are as complex as the design itself, or more. As complex or more complex. In any case, God shall be supposed to be simple. This is the classical, one of the classical attributes of God, that he is simple. So that's not an argument that God is simple if he exists, but I'm merely stating that this is what the term has usually been taken to mean. The upshot is we can't rule out his existence a priori on the basis of Occam's razor. Well, he's more complex than not existing, so therefore we should assume God doesn't exist. We can't say that, because God is not complex. He's simple. So again, I'm not arguing for divine simplicity, but merely observing that that is how God has usually been described in philosophical theology. Alright, so in the next video, part 2, I'll list my predictions and the numerical values next to them. And last of all, I will explain why I give the numbers that I do give to those. So I'm going to leave that for last, because some of you might not care to listen to all the gory details of why I picked a 0 or a 1 or a 2. So it's important that I have that, but I don't want to bore you to tears, so I'm going to include it, but you can skip it if you'd like. But at any rate, I do hope you'll listen to the rest of the videos coming, all the videos prior to when I explain the method to my madness. Alright, so that concludes part 1. Thanks for watching, and shalom to you all. Out.